Yeah, so I'm Greg. I am representing the rental evictions group. And the goal of our project was to take this concept of precarity, which was mentioned earlier, this kind of idea that we have to access property through other people. And we want to understand what the consequences of this relationship is. And in order to ground this in the real world, we chose Metro Vancouver as a case study. And the goal of this is to understand where evictions occur and to whom they occur to. There we go. So whenever we think about property, we have to consider what our position to property is. And this can come in different forms. For example, I have to think about my own position to property when I speak about it. I live at home with my parents, and we live in a detached house that we mortgage. So technically, if my parents don't pay for it, the bank takes control of it. So what may seem like a rather stable form of housing is actually quite vulnerable. And from this, we also have to consider other types of housing. For example, there are formal arrangements such as renting or owning houses or property. And there's also more informal and often more vulnerable arrangements such as squatting or being unhoused. And this is all to underscore the fact that we all have some kind of relationship to property. And these different relationships have varying degrees of vulnerability. And as a result, there are very few people who truly escape property. And I guess the key idea is that we're all stuck in the storm, but we have different ships to weather it. So with this relational idea of property in mind, we can begin to think about the causes of rental eviction. Rental eviction is often cast as something which results from individual factors, and this can involve the non-payment of rent, for example. In a situation like that, the person breaks the contract, which allows them to occupy a space, and they're thus removed. And this puts a lot of blame on the individual. And as such, we have to think about systemic factors, things that go beyond individual causes. And we come from a geographical perspective, so we do have to appreciate space in this respect. And the classic example that we always think about is gentrification. We think about the way that capital moves into a neighborhood and revitalizes it, and at the expense of existing people within that neighborhood. For example, the cost of existing housing may go up, thus pricing people out of the neighborhood, or people may experience rent evictions, whereby the people that exist within the current properties are evicted and their houses are then demolished for new development. And this is all to say that there are many factors that can cause rental eviction that go beyond just an individual's inability to pay rent. So from this, we want to take all this background theory and put it into the actual world, obviously. And to do this, we focused on the Canadian context, and specifically, we related this to Vancouver. In particular, we draw on a study that came out from UBC this year, which attempted to examine trends in rental evictions throughout Canada based on the Canadian Housing Survey of 2018. And behind this, the study wished to understand where evictions occur and who is affected by these evictions. And the graph you see here is a representation of estimates made about where evictions occur. And as was found in the study, approximately 10.5% of renters in Vancouver were evicted from their house within a 5-year period prior to the study. And this is a rather staggering number. And frankly, it's the highest number amongst other urban areas within the country. So this is the where of the problem. And Vancouver, in case we haven't recognized how expensive it's getting, is obviously a place where this problem is centralized. So from this, we also have to understand who is actually affected. And what we found through this study is that there is an uneven and unequal distribution in the eviction rates based on demographic groups. For example, when looking at ethnicity, indigenous people had a particular vulnerability and a higher rate to evictions. When looking at immigration categories, refugees had greater vulnerability than other categories. Further, education levels were relevant in that lower educational attainment was often associated with a higher rate of eviction, and family composition is also a relevant factor in this respect because there's an intersection of single male fathers that in particular face higher rates of eviction. And the other inequality behind this is an inequality in the well-being of renters. People who have been evicted often face economic hardships and worse physical and mental health outcomes. And this is all to say that demographic groups, people from various demographic groups experience certain vulnerabilities to rental evictions. So from this, the main finding of our study is that evictions are an intersectional issue that simultaneously perpetuate and exacerbate existing inequities in society. And this is to say that people who find themselves at the intersection of these vulnerable demographics often have particularly compounding vulnerabilities when it comes to accessing property and housing. And as well, this is to state that there's a kind of two-way relationship whereby being evicted leads to greater vulnerability, and this vulnerability carries over into future housing arrangements. Lastly, while we developed this project, we came across several resources, most of which are more on a basis of support for people who experience rental eviction. And we want to share this QR code, which leads to these resources, but these resources are also available on our poster, and we're happy to talk about them. So thank you.